my career, I've had a wonderful opportunity to really activate potential across a variety of sectors and places and with a multitude of people. And the hope is that you will hear tonight an example of our speaker who is doing just that, right? She, in and of herself, is an example of an activated leader, and she is creating those ripples of change throughout both Ventura County as well as Santa Barbara County and beyond. We all have the good fortune tonight of hearing from Alia Azariah. So Alia is an expert when it comes to trafficking. She is a leading voice on the subject and has done significant work in Ventura. And as she told me earlier tonight, she's pleased that she's getting some invitations from Santa Barbara County to come talk, to discuss, to do work with entities who are here. And so I'll leave your story to you, but thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. I've had this up. I know we've been very busy chatting, getting to know each other. Did anybody have a chance to scan this QR code and look at it? So this will take you to the ACEs quiz. ACEs is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And so it's a research-based survey that kind of predicts what your life is going to be like based on what you've gone through as a child. And so I love to have people who are listening to my story or who are understanding this topic take this, because it feels like it helps us understand. We have a lot of conversations around privilege in the last couple of years, so I know you guys are kind of aware of that, but I think as it comes to talking about trafficking, the ACEs are really where we understand, like, wow, was I somebody who was vulnerable, or was I somebody who had the privilege of not being vulnerable? And it helps us find that common ground. So that's why I love to have this. If you have a chance to take it, please do. I think it'll help you with whatever your passion is, and especially if it's people or youth, to kind of understand where your own experiences could have led you, or maybe even what you've overcome. If you have an ACEs score over 3 or 4, your likelihood of graduating high school decreased significantly. Your likelihood of developing chronic illness increases significantly. Your likelihood of entering into violent relationships increases greatly. They've really found that the higher the ACEs score, the more adverse adult experiences and experiences you're just going to have, and the harder your life is going to be for a lot of reasons. We are going to skip to me. My name is Alia Azariah. I am born and raised in Ventura. I wear a lot of hats, as I know probably many of you do. My primary role is that I am the director of aftercare for a national organization called Safe House Project, which you have a few flyers on some of the work that we do. I also contract to do all of the training and awareness for Forever Found, which is the local victim service agency for Ventura County. So it serves all of the youth in Ventura County that have been exploited or are at risk of exploitation. I'm also sit on the Ventura County Human Trafficking Task Force. Our state is really innovative in that they had the first survivor kind of advisory board on issues related to trafficking. It was the first one in their state. There's 10 of us, 10 survivors who sat on that board and influenced state policy, influenced state practice. And so I sat on that for the last 3 years and got to be a part of introducing the new board. Oh, there's something behind me. And vetting the new board and introducing those new survivors that are now taking our state where we left off about a year ago, and excited about the work they're doing. And my contact information is on there as well, or I can get it for you, but it's really easy, alia@safehouseproject.org. We're going to get a little bit more about me. And so part of the reason that I had you, that I like to talk about the ACEs, and I'm going to show you pictures of me when I was little, because research shows us that stories are actually the most effective means of changing hearts and minds. In fact, like the thing that is most indicative about a way a person is going to vote on an issue or how involved they're going to get on an issue is whether or not they've been exposed to stories related to it. Not their political party, not their family opinion, but actually whether they've been exposed to stories. And research also shows us, because I am a research girly, that the more pictures I show you, the more you will remember. So I'm going to show you a lot of pictures. So this is me when I was little. Look how cute I am. By the time I reached about this age, I had an ACEs score of 7. So that's 7 out of 10. Most people who move on to live really healthy lives are about 3 or under. So my early childhood was very, very difficult. I grew up in Pierpont area, Ventura, which some of you, if you're from that area, might be familiar with. It's very different now, 30 years ago, than it was when I was growing up. It's been through a lot of gentrification. It's strange. I dropped my 3rd grader off there for school now, at the same school that when I was in 3rd grade, kids were already smoking weed at Pierpont. And now they're like, they're all riding their little skateboards, and they are all, come from homes that really show that their families are invested in their future, and that was not the case when I was growing up there. It was a very gang-infested area. I was actually conceived because my mom was being exploited, and she was sexually assaulted, and I came from that experience. And so I grew up not knowing that, but feeling that. I didn't know that until I was much earlier, until I was much older, but once I found out, it was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense for kind of why our relationship was the way it was. My mom was in addiction. My mom was not able to care for me. And while I had a lot of normal experiences because my grandparents would drive me up here and take me to the zoo, my grandparents would put me in classes, I also had a lot of abnormal experiences and those adverse childhood experiences, such as sexual abuse and poverty when I was with my mom, and just general feelings of unsafety. My mom was in a lot of domestic violence relationships, and so I grew up kind of in between worlds. I grew up a little bit in the entertainment industry. I grew up and also like not having anything to eat at the same time. So there was a kind of a weird experience for me where I didn't quite know where I fit. And I knew that things weren't the same for me as they were for the people that I was going to school with. And when I got to be about 12 years old, 11 years old, those things had really shaped who I thought I was. So I wasn't, in my mind, a person who experienced this abandonment. I wasn't a person who had experienced this abuse. I was this abuse. I was that abandonment. And in 6th grade, usually you're changing schools, you're going into a middle school, and they had us write an autobiography about ourselves, and my grandma is like the person that keeps every paper you've ever scribbled on, and she gave me like a big file cabinet full of my things, and in that was this 6th grade autobiography, and the entire 2 pages was like justifying my existence. I read it, and it was explaining my abandonment, it was explaining like my abuse. It wasn't, I like to go and, do ballet. It wasn't, I'm on this sports team and this is my favorite color. It was trying to justify the things that had happened to me, because that was at the forefront of who I thought that I was. I put these pictures because I think it helps us to remember how young people are. We forget very easily how young 13, I know we have young people in here right now, but we forget how young 13 is, or 12 is, or even 16 is. And when I was about 12 years old, I started running away. And I think that's one of the things that's really hard for people to understand, because my grandma was home. My grandma was a safe person. She wasn't a perfect person, but I wasn't being abused in her home. And so they have a hard time understanding, like, why would you leave and why would you run away? And for me, safety is more than just physical safety. Safety is also how you feel. And what I felt there was that I knew that in that environment I didn't fit. I knew in my mind I'm too damaged to be here, I'm too damaged to go to this school, and so I would run away because I felt like, we have that feeling of like, if I can just get out of here, I'll escape myself. And that's what I was trying to do. And there is a statistic that says, like, within 45 minutes, I think this was done a study in Nevada, but like within 45 minutes of a runaway running away, they're usually contacted by a trafficker. And my experience was probably it took a little bit longer than that. This was the dawn of social media. This was MySpace age. But it was just as nefarious then as it is now. And this was the dawn of social media, and I found out that really bad things would happen if I ran away. So if I met somebody online who would take me in before I ran away, I could usually maybe mitigate some of that harm to myself. And so I would meet people online, adult men online. I would search MySpace was wild. You could like search for men between a certain age, between this different demographically and within certain zip codes. And so I would do that, and I would send out messages. I'm like 12 years old at this time, and I would always get a plethora of people who were responding and were willing to come pick me up in the middle of the night. And so I started doing that. And at one point when I was about 13, I met a guy who I didn't know at the time, but had a history of trafficking young girls in our area, really in Santa Barbara County. So I sent a message to a guy in Santa Barbara, and he came down and he picked me up, and I think I was probably, this girl here, about this age. And he came and picked me up, and he told me everything I'd ever wanted to hear in my whole life. He told me that I was beautiful. He told me that he understood the things that I was going through. He told me that he wanted to take care of me. And I'd been so adultified by the things that I experienced that the idea of starting a family with somebody and going off and being adults made a lot of sense, but I was also 13 years old. So I couldn't make those things happen, obviously, and I was completely reliant on people to take care of me. And he was 28 at that time. And so he told me that he was going to take care of me, that we were going to be together forever. And I believed him, and I thought that he wanted good things for me. And he didn't turn the tables on me right away. He spent about 6 months driving down and picking me up. Anytime I would call, would run away with him. We would be gone for days. He would provide for me. He would feed me while we were gone. And it felt a lot safer than the ways that I was running away before. When I would run away without him, before I had met him, I would get sexually assaulted. I would have people who wouldn't want to let me leave. I was in a conversation with a Santa Barbara youth this morning who is actively being exploited. And we were having this conversation of how are we alive? Both of us, you as somebody who's actually experiencing this, but how are we as girls who've gone through this still here? How many cars have we gotten into with strange men we didn't know? How many times did we stay at somebody's house that we didn't know? And it must be because there's greater plans for us. And so about 6 months into being with him and running away with him, we were at the I called it the Sandpiper, but I think it's actually the Sandyland Hotel, the Sandyland Hotel in Carpinteria. And he had started bringing me around kind of what we think of as when we think of a pimp, he'd started bringing me around this guy. The guy that trafficked me that I met looked like Paul Walker. He wore polo shirts and khakis and was white with blonde hair and blue eyes and looked like a prep school boy. The person that he would start bringing me around with kind of looked like what we might think of more as a pimp from what we've seen from TV. And that guy was trafficking girls out of the Santa Barbara Rhino. And he would bring me around this guy, and he would show me these adult women who were working at the Santa Barbara Rhino, and we would talk about how beautiful they were, and he would show me just how much money they were making. He would also show me how violent this pimp, this trafficker, was with these older girls, and he would say just how happy he was that he didn't have to do those things with me. And so he was normalizing that experience before he was ever introducing me to it. And when I had just turned 14, we were there at the Sandyland Motel with with this other pimp, and he was I look back now and I'm like, this was so scripted. This was so scripted that they were going to have this conversation, and I was so naive and so coerced in this experience, and so dependent on this person for all of my like psychosocial needs that we have, for love and support, and for when I would run away for my physiological needs also, that I didn't see it as manipulation. But they had this conversation about like, where are you guys gonna sleep tonight? And he's like, oh, you know, we don't have enough money for a hotel room, so we're gonna sleep in my car. And there was this conversation of like, well, you know, there is another way. Like, you could get money for this girl. And they laughed and kind of teased me about not being ready. And he gave me this opportunity and basically said, like, are you down for me? Like, after everything I've done for you, after everything I've given you, like, do you really love me? And I came to this point at 14 years old where I thought, this is probably where my life was going to end up anyway. I guess I thought I was going to end up here at 18 or 20. So it must not be that different than all of the things that have happened to me before. And it's going to make this person that I feel dependent on, who I think cares about me, who's the first person that's told me like that I'm beautiful, who's always there when I call, who's the only person in my life who's always there when I call. It's going to make him happy with me. And so I turned my first trick that day, which means I was trafficked for the first time in the Sandyland Motel in Carpinteria. And I think what shocks people the most is it was not a life-shattering experience. It was so normal compared to the other things that I had gone through that we went and picked up some food afterwards. He let me smoke some weed, and I moved on with my life. Like, wow, I guess this isn't really that bad. He continued to traffic me for the next 4 years between mostly Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, LA County, and Vegas. And I had just a lot of experiences that made me feel like nobody in the community was going to care. I remember being around 16 years old, and I was at the Paseo Nuevo Mall, which was a place that I used to go with my grandma a lot when I was little. And we were arguing about something. I could not even remember what that was. And I got mouthy, and I'm 16, and he slapped me across the face at like 2 p.m. at the Paseo Nuevo. And I remember thinking like, oh, somebody's gonna say something. Like, this is it. Like, it was one of those moments where I was mad and I was ready to say something if somebody had asked me. And people made eye contact with me, and they kept walking, and nothing happened. And I remember just feeling like, okay, it's true that there's something about me that's different than other people who don't live this way. And so this was life for me until I turned 18, or about 18 years old. I went to a really terrible program, not like Hope Refuge. We've had this conversation at length that Sally and I have. I went to one of those like horrible programs that you see about on, like that Paris Hilton talks about and you see about on the news, these terrible programs in Utah that they sent kids to. I went to one of those, and again, it was kind of this experience of like, man, I don't want to be here, but like, maybe this won't be so bad. Like, maybe I'll get some help or some hope. And instead, it was just a reinforcement that like, okay, the only person that's going to be there for me is my trafficker. So I left 4 days after I turned 18. I came back to Ventura, We had a $2 Vista bus that would go from Ventura to Santa Barbara and drop you off over there by the library. And I had been doing that for years. So I don't know if you're all Santa Barbara locals or how long you've been here, but the early aughts on State Street, there were a lot of homeless teenagers. If you were walking around then, you saw me. I was one of these kids that would sit on State Street in front of the Habit, or would sit on the benches that were there in front of State Street and be loud and probably decrease home values. And but that was where I would go when I was homeless and on the street. And that's, this was before social media, so everything was very out in the open. Right now, you might think that those things don't exist anymore, but they've gone online, or the youth know where to find each other outside of open air areas like State Street because they've connected online before they've run away. But that's where we would meet. And so I took the $2 Vista bus at 18 back up here, and I thought, man, like now I'm 18. Now my grandma's not going to be calling runaway calls on me. Now like things are different. And it was true, things were different at 18, because as soon as you turn 18, nobody looks at you as a victim anymore. Before I was 18, although we weren't talking about trafficking, nobody was having conversations like this, at least people were like, why are you here? You're a child. Like, shouldn't you go home maybe? That doesn't happen once you're 18. And so I spent the next 8 or so years living in and out of exploitation with that trafficker, with other traffickers in domestic violence relationships. I would try and go back to school. I went to City College, went to Santa Barbara City College and tried to make it work. But the trauma that I had experienced, both before I was trafficked, while I was being trafficked, wouldn't allow me to be successful. And it wasn't until I was 27, I'm actually much older than 27, believe it or not. It wasn't until 27 that I was able to get out. That picture of me there in the middle, I think I'm about 20 there, or maybe 18 there, about 22 there. I was 27 in that picture. That was the best I could muster. This was like a family get together. This was like Christmas. And this was like going to be with my family, trying to show up the very most put together that I could be. And if you like look at the difference now, the best that I could put together was not much. And I was in a different trafficking situation with someone who was like very violent, very scary situation, who had a long history of trafficking women. And I found myself in a position where I was like, am I gonna do this forever? Am I gonna die like this? Like, is this the end? There's studies that say that once a person starts being exploited or trafficked, they have a life expectancy of 7 years. I was in for 14 years at this point. And I was just done. And I thought, like, I'm either gonna kill myself, or there's gotta be something else. And for me, it was a story. So I knew of one other girl. I'd never spoken to her in person, but I knew people who knew her. I knew this one girl who had a life like mine. I knew that she was the same. I couldn't say like, well, her stuff wasn't as bad. I knew that she'd experienced the things that I'd experienced, and I knew that her life looked different now. And I knew that she was like in a graduate program, she was getting married. Things looked very different for her. And so I knew that it was possible because I had heard a story. And I really looked at it, at that point, I look at it very differently now, but at that point I looked at it like a formula. Well, if I just do exactly what Deanna did, then everything will be okay. And it did work fairly well for me, and I was able to exit. It took a lot of faith for me to be willing to enter into a program after what I had experienced as a minor in Utah. I didn't trust people that said that they were there to help you. I didn't trust like programs where they were going to have like rules and restrictions, because the ones that I had, the program that I went to in Utah was absolutely labor trafficking. So there was a lot of abuse. It was horrendous. And so it took a lot for me to be willing to jump into that. And when I did, life really changed. And I had the opportunity to change my life and be here and be who I am now. In the last 6 years since I've stepped into this industry, not just out of the life, but into like working full time in advocacy, I've been able to speak to UK Parliament twice. They've asked me to come and speak on exploitation. I've spoken at our Capitol building twice, at our US Capitol building, at our state Capitol building multiple times, been recognized on the floor of our state Senate. These things that, even being in this room, talking to all of you makes absolutely no sense with my life experiences. But this morning, I'm talking to a 15-year-old in our county's juvenile hall who experienced these things yesterday. So as much progress as we've made, we have made huge progress in the last 20 years compared to where we were. There are still miles and miles and miles to go, and this is still happening to our youth here. I can tell you, I've met with them, I've looked at them, I've sat with them, and they still need help. So we're going to transition a little bit into some of that. So specifically in Santa Barbara County, your DA's office has published some information over the last few years. There were 207 survivors identified between 2017 and 2021, and this is just by your DA's office. This isn't including the survivors that have been able to exit through things like what I did, which didn't involve law enforcement, right? Which is really the majority of people who don't exit through law enforcement. I tend to find that about 70% who are contacted by a victim service agency first will take the services, but only about 20% who are contacted by law enforcement first will take the services. So that's just the people that have been contacted by law enforcement in the DA's office. A third of those that were identified as trafficked in Santa Barbara County are minors, and that continues to be the case. 43% of those that were identified were Santa Barbara residents. So that's not even counting like our Ventura County girls or boys that we find here in Santa Barbara County. We approximate between myself, the DA's office, our victim service agencies here, we've estimated there's about 200 youth right now between Ventura and Santa Barbara counties that are needing services of some kind. Maybe they don't need a safe home, but they've been exploited or they're at high risk of exploitation and they need some kind of service. About 40% of those don't have access to the services they need. Either they are entering through the wrong systems, their family members don't know how to access the correct assistance for them, there aren't enough beds for them to go to if they do need a safe home, or they're not being identified. When it comes to our state, we have the highest number of trafficking cases in the country. So this is a huge California problem. We're consistently rated in the top 5 or top 3 for the number of people who are being exploited per capita in the US. Just a little bit of information. We've got 13 trafficking reports per every 100,000 people. So if you think about the amount of people in our county, and think of that 13 of each of those 100,000 are being exploited, and about 43%, so about almost half of them are minors. That's how we get some of our information. And so in the state, 25% of the reported cases were minors. Let me say again, these are reported cases. A very small number of situations like mine are reported. I never reported my experience until the last couple of years when I needed to for my own safety. So the majority of these experiences are never reported. In the US, it's the second largest criminal enterprise in the country. You can buy a gun and you can sell a gun one time, but you can buy a girl or a boy or a child over and over and over again. And if you get caught with guns or drugs, they're not going to lie for you. If you get caught with somebody that you've spent the last 6 months manipulating, telling that you love, filling a need that they've never had filled before, not only can you sell them again, but they'll probably lie for you and take the blame. It's estimated that this is the State Department is estimating that there's about 300,000 people, or children, not just people, but 300,000 people. No, 300,000 children trafficked in the US. The number is higher on people who are being trafficked. And the average age that a person is first trafficked is 12 years old. It's kind of 12 to 14 we talk about in our country. I did a study with UC Berkeley the last couple of years on our youth in Ventura County, or not Ventura County, in California, and that number held at 12. We found that 12 was the average age of entrance into trafficking in California. And 40% of those people that are trafficked were first trafficked by a family member. And that's, I think, the number that even for me, as somebody who's experienced trafficking, who's experienced all these things, continues to shock me, is that 40% the first time they were trafficked is by their mom, by their grandma, by their older sister, by a foster parent. And I'd say that that's very consistent with the youth that I see in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. That isn't an anomaly. That isn't something that's happening somewhere else. These are our kids here. So I work for an organization called Safe House Project. We're a national organization, so we serve survivors in every part of the country. And when we started in 2018, they had kind of published that report of 300,000 Americans, children being trafficked. They'd also published a report that said that 1% of victims were ever identified. So as you can imagine, that number is very, very low. My numbers obviously got a little messy here. But we only had beds, safe house beds. So these are homes that could provide like the kind of stability and care that these youth who were being identified needed. We only had enough beds to meet the needs of 10% of the youth that were being identified. That number has raised. Chuck and Sally are part of raising that here in Ventura County, or in Santa Barbara County. But then there was also a study published that if 80% of the people who were being trafficked, if they did not receive proper care within the first year, they would end up being re-exploited. So when we look back at my story and I understand the things that I experienced and like, okay, well, I did get to exit. I did get, law enforcement took me from my trafficker and I got placed in this program in Utah. Why did I go back? I got care, but I didn't get proper care. So it was part of this 80%. Because improper care actually does more harm than no care at all. And so what we do as an organization is we assist programs that are building. We've been able to give grants to hundreds of programs across the country in the last 5 years. But our mission is twofold. So it's to increase survivor identification above that 1%. And we believe that the best way to do that is through survivor stories, not just myself, because my experience is only my experience. I don't have that experience of being trafficked by a family member. For you to understand that experience, you would need to hear from somebody who experienced that. And so we really believe in uplifting survivor stories to increase that identification and to ensure that every single survivor in our country, male, female, woman, child, trans person, adult, dependent adult, has access to safe housing and holistic care by accelerating safe house capacity. So we have some programs in our country, or in our county and in our state. We do not have enough programs to fill the need. And we certainly do not have enough quality programs that can meet that 80% that need it. So we do this through a few ways. We do this by increasing identification, education. You all now have been a little more educated likely than you were before. We do trainings for healthcare workers. We have a whole CEU that's been developed with opportunity for CEUs that's been developed with the Academy of Forensic Nursing. We do law enforcement trainings. We do all sorts of different trainings. To date, we've trained over 270,000 people in the last 5 years. We also support survivors. So we provide emergency assistance. This is my favorite part because it used to be my job and I hated it and I was bad at it. When I had this job, we served about 100 survivors every year. We did some shifting around and put someone else in that role. In last year, in 2023, we served over 500 survivors through emergency assistance. In 2024, already by end of August, we have served over 850 survivors through emergency assistance, and about 30% of those are youth. And a significant number, because of my involvement here, come from the state of California. So we will provide for emergency transportation. I've sat on the phone with a girl as she walked out of the home where she was being exploited in, and trusted me enough to get into the Uber that I had called after she'd only ever had one phone call with me. We will provide for their basic necessities. We'll put them in a hotel. We'll Instacart them food. We'll Instacart them clothes if they left in that kind of a situation. We'll help them get accepted into a program that can meet their needs and actually give them the right program. We will help them get through airport security. We will stay on the phone. We will talk to the airline. We will pay for the airline. We will pay for the Uber to the program. However it takes, we try to remove every single possible barrier to get this person into the healing that they deserve and that they want. I have sat with our DAs here in Santa Barbara, with our public defenders and DAs and judges in Ventura County to advocate for youth who are not being released into programs. We will show up to court. We will show up to the MDT, to the Child Services meeting in order to advocate for these youth if they want to go into program. We also hire a lot of survivors, like myself. I was one of the first survivors on staff many years ago. This is an out-of-date number. And then we also support programs. So we have over 250 partner programs across the country that work to meet this need in one way or another. And we operate kind of as we operate standards of care. So we developed standards of care based on research and industry professionals that make sure that no survivor ever goes into a program like what I did. That if they're taking that leap of believing that there's hope, that nobody's gonna squash that hope. It's one of the biggest concerns that I get. Was on a call with a Santa Barbara County kiddo this morning who told me that she wants to go into a program, and her biggest fear is I've seen those documentaries. She's I've seen those programs that people go to. That's her biggest fear, is how do I know that I'm going somewhere that's gonna care for me? And so we will put boots on the ground. We will go to these programs. I was a program in Phoenix yesterday, making sure that when a survivor says I'm ready, I'm willing to do the hard work of healing, that they're actually given what they're promised. Just last year, so we also operate a grant. So 85 cents on every dollar that we receive as an organization goes directly into programming. And we also operate a grant. And last year, I'm over the grant. It's my favorite part of my job because I get to support people who are doing a lot of the boots on the ground work. So last year, through our grant, we added 371 new beds through that funding to the national landscape. So when I'm trying to think of as I'm going around in Santa Barbara County, what do we need here? How can we as Safe House Project be part of the solution? I've had to come up with kind of tangibly, what does that look like, right? So right now, to continue the work in Santa Barbara County that we're doing, it's about $300,000. So $100,000 for training, to train 300,000 kids. If you have teenagers, you know they talk. Nobody knows what's happening more at my 14-year-old's high school than my 14-year-old. And so I honestly believe, when I work with kids, I always tell them I'm here to ruin your good time. Because the more you know, the more you have my voice in your head, and the more when somebody says something, the less easily coerced you are, because you're going to have my voice in your head. So it would cost us about $100,000 to train 30,000 kids and 3,000 teachers in Santa Barbara County. To provide training to 30 free and charitable clinics. We have a training specifically to those because they have a lot of intersections with people who are being trafficked, and to train 5,000 healthcare workers and 300 law enforcement community members and church members. Your law enforcement has a ways to go, let me tell you right now. And then $200,000 for case management. Right now, I'm going to be blatantly honest with you about the way that things are in Santa Barbara and Ventura County. Ventura County, we figured out case management. We have this figured out. Santa Barbara County, your services are very fragmented. And so it's very difficult to figure out, like, okay, who is this youth's case manager? Who understands the story of this youth and what they need? Well, I understand their mental health needs. Well, I understand their housing needs. I understand their scholastic needs, but we don't have, the term is CSEC. It's commercial sexual exploitation of children. It means the human trafficking of children. We don't have a centralized agency here in Santa Barbara County that will work with them no matter what placement they're at, no matter whether they're in juvenile hall, if they're at Hope Refuge, if they're at here. We don't have somebody that's keeping track on them in that way, no matter what service they come in through. Somebody who, if they're on probation, is keeping track of them, if they're in child welfare. But then we have all these kids who like have parents who care about them, but who maybe are a single parent who's working multiple jobs and can't provide supervision to their child, and their child ends up exploited because of that. There's almost no services for that family. So it would cost us about $200,000 to do case management for the 80 survivors. That's about 20% of the identified youths who are ready to access services. Right now they call me, and I can't meet the need. Right now I have a contract with Santa Barbara Juvenile Probation. I can't meet with every kid that they want me to meet with. There's only one of me. I have a full-time job. I can't do every call for training. I can't do all of it by myself. So it would increase the capacity there. And then there's a lot of things outside of finances that we need, right? And one of those things is absolutely awareness. So you guys took the first step by being here. We have a free community awareness module training that you have access to now in that paper. It's called On Watch. It's amazing. It's video-based. I learn by video. I don't know about you. And so it's module-based. It's 1 hour, but it can be broken into this 7-minute video, this 7-minute video, and it's meant for community members. It's meant for teachers, for real estate agents, for just everyone who is a neighbor, right? And it's free, and it talks about how to spot trafficking, how to identify it in all of its different forms, and it was written fully by the survivors whose stories you hear in those experiences. And so that's like the number one thing you can do, is to educate yourself and your community. So you had this conversation. Who can you have this conversation with when you leave here? Who do you know? What's your social influence? Is it law enforcement? Is it real estate? Is it schools? Is it farm workers? Like, trafficking happens in every community across our country. And the best thing that you can do is to educate 5 more people out of this, but also to activate them into doing something. Back in Ventura County about 10 years ago, this happened. We started creating change because there was one really outspoken woman who did not want things to stay the way that they were, and she started sending mailers out to people, and she started putting flyers on people's door. Hey, I've had this conversation with our district attorney's office with this. These are the results that we want to see. Will you hold them accountable? And it was just one really loud person who was willing to make her community aware of the things that we needed to celebrate and protect those who are most vulnerable. You can do things like what Casey does, host fundraising events, awareness events, and we also have like a lot of brand awareness stuff where we'll partner with organizations and turn their web pages blue and to activate people towards trafficking as well. And then the last one, this is like the vulnerable one for me, but I really believe that stories are the most effective way to change hearts and minds. And so I was activated by a actual Santa Barbara young person that I work with. She is like, for me, it's never me that keeps me going, right? It's always the kid that I see is affected by the work that I'm doing. And so I have one kid right now that I'm very, very hands-on with, who's a Santa Barbara County kiddo. And she really prompted me to start to write a book and write a memoir. And she, at 14 years old at the time, was like, what would I do without you? Like, I feel like, what if I didn't know you? What if I didn't know your story? And it's not about me, right? It's about like, for her, I'm that one story that she's heard of. And for me, that was a lifeline. And if I died tomorrow, my story goes with me. and the ability to affect these kids and the ability to change the minds of the people who have the social influence to change the lives of these kids goes with me. And I can't do everything. I can't sit in every juvenile hall cell with a kid. I can't meet with every kid at Safe Harbor. I can't have every conversation I want to have, but I could put a book in every single one of their hands. And so it's a project that I'm working on with a friend of mine. And we've come a long way in it. But what we're still looking for to be able to get this into the hands of kids is publishing connections. It's always the hardest part, I think, of writing. And so if you have social connections there that you feel like would be passionate about this cause, that would be something we'd be interested in as well. So I think I've already gone over my 20 minutes, but thank you guys for having me. Thank you for, this isn't a fun topic. This isn't an easy topic to digest or go home and sit with. So thank you for being willing to sit in the hard and hear about something that isn't gonna make you go home with warm fuzzies. But I promise you that our kids in this county and in Ventura County are the most incredible human beings I've ever had the chance to be around. And they're so capable, and if we can get them the assistance that they need, they will change our world. And so thanks for being a part of making sure that they have the ability and that the world has the benefit of getting to know them as they find the things they need to heal.